Hello and welcome to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen, and I'm joined today by Dr. Joe Malone. Welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate your ability to have me on this and the honor of being here. Thank you.
I'm really excited for this conversation today because we're going to be talking about the biological sex differences between men and women and how men and women fall in love differently. So you're what's the official phrase? Sexual integrity scientist. What is that? I've never heard that phrase before. Can you explain a little bit about what that actually is?
Yes, I'm a rare breed, I guess you'd say. I'm the only person that I know actually in academia like me. Um, so basically, I came to this through a series of, I think, of providential happenings in my life. I didn't ever intend to end up here, but I created at the university I was teaching at in Tennessee, Middle Tennessee State. I
Mm-hmm.
created a college women's wellness program there, a class that I specifically taught them in women's personal conditioning. And I was doing research for the PhD I got, and in amongst the research that I was doing on, of course, like exercise effects, and their ability to get exercise on campus and their ability to get good nutrition on campus, this theme arose that I was really not expecting. And it had to do with this thing called hookup culture. And didn't take me very long. Amongst the interviews, I did 32 in-depth interviews with them and 10 focus groups, all women's class focus groups. And I saw right away that this was much more damaging. This casual sex, which is what they were describing, and avoidance of relationship, although that most of them wanted to have relationships, but the males didn't. I could see that it was much more destructive to them than what I had originally set out to do. So I went to my committee and asked them if I could switch in the direction of sexual wellness rather than just overall, young women's wellness.
Mm-hmm.
And they said just what you said, Colleen. They said, we don't know if anybody else is doing anything like this. So yeah, we think that would be a great idea. And so as I went along, I got the PhD, ended up getting canceled at this university because I was unaware that I was ruffling feathers with saying things like males and females are physiologically different. And, again, I had all the proof because I was researching it this whole time.
Mm-hmm.
But in the process of all this, writing the book that eventually published, which again switched from an overall wellness, young women's wellness focus to young women's sexual wellness, I realized that sexual wellness really, when you really, took all the research and you kind of sifted it all down, parsed it all down,
Mm-hmm.
sexual wellness equaled sexual integrity, because sexual integrity is the way we're designed. And, I didn't come to that conclusion because I was a Christian. I specifically went into my research with the thought process of, I'm going to do the best, find the best research, find the authentic research,
Mm-hmm.
the natural science mostly based research, and some social science. And I'm going to write the book and teach people and speak on this, telling them the truth. And so it turned out that even though as we're going to see today, it's a difficult sometimes journey as far as getting on the pathway to traditional courtship, traditional marriage, traditional family. It is actually, though, the optimal human condition. So I'll say it again. What I've discovered is sexual wellness is sexual integrity.
What do you
And
mean by both those terms? Like, I hear that and I kind of generally know what you mean, but I don't know exactly what is sexual integrity? Is that just picking one partner for life? Is the wellness health wellness, or is it emotional as well? What does that look like?
good questions. It's all wellness is all of it. Really, wellness is the big picture. You get another good word for it would be well-being. So it could include the physical, the social, the emotional, interpersonal, all of it. And integrity, the best way I think to paint the picture of integrity as far as sexual integrity is, and this is what I came upon. I was originally, not long ago, I was a Protestant, but what drew me to the Catholic Church was the church's teaching. The main thing was the church's teaching on human sexuality. Because when I did the research and then God brought different manifestations of Catholicism into my life that I wasn't planning on this, but these various people that, for instance, I went up and spoke at Princeton, first of all, to a group called the Love and Fidelity Network that started there in 2007, and it was because one of the undergraduates there got tired of hookup culture being the only option on campus. It rapidly spread then to all the other Ivy League campuses, Notre Dame, Stanford, et cetera, et cetera. The people up there in 2018 read my book, and they asked me to come up to speak to their conference. I was glad to do that. And when I got up there, they on the surface they're a non-denominational, non-religious group, but really what I found out was they were primarily Catholic, a Catholic group. From there was people there that asked me to go to Catholic University of America to speak next. So I spoke there in the spring, and there was a gentleman there named Dr. Pat Fagan, who is one of the luminaries I found out in the Catholic world. My wife Jody and I had an afternoon in a pub there on the campus with him, and he ended up explaining all of the different things that I eventually, found out mapped on so well. The Catholic teachings, as far as human sexuality, mapped on so well to physiologically what my research was showing, that it showed me that basically what the Catholic Church had developed all these years, of course, with God working through them, really was the ideal approach to sexuality. Let me give you an example, because I can tell you're wanting an example. This is something I was thinking about talking about later, but let's just bring it right up. I'm going to go to my notes for this. Women's sexual behavior. Okay, let me see if I can find it here. Okay. Young women's sexual behavior affects their future health. Now, what do I mean by that? So here's the tie-in between the integrity and the wellness. Early promiscuity leads directly to higher chances of vaginal and cervical cancer, for one thing. None or minimal number of pregnancies and none or minimal breastfeeding raises her lifetime chances of developing ovarian and uterine cancer. So these are very specific things, very specific behaviors that raise these risks down the line. Delayed childbearing and fewer pregnancies raise the risk of lifetime development of breast cancer.
Yeah, we had Dr. Angela Lanfranchi on our show talking about that at one point, and then how hormonal birth control also leads to an increase in breast cancer.
Right. Yeah. And a woman who has, this was a shocking statistic to me, a woman who has her first child around the age of 20 has half the chance of developing breast cancer as a woman who has her first child around the age of 30. So again, the picture I got, and I won't go further with that, there is more on promiscuity as far as lifetime sexual partners. I can mention that later, but what jumped out at me, Colleen, was that the classic Catholic family, by the way, Dr. Fagan, I think he has 7 kids. The classic Catholic family of saving sex for marriage, keeping, not allowing premarital sex, and then getting married probably earlier because of that, in a lot of cases, and then starting to have children earlier and having many children, being open, the procreative and unitive functions of the sacrament of marriage for Catholics, and then breastfeeding. All of that has a tendency to, again, make women's downstream health effects the optimal, the most positive they can be. And with breast cancer becoming the number one cancer diagnosis in the world as of 2020, that's an important realization for, I think, especially for young women to have. So it was things like that, almost a miracle, in the fact that maps on so exactly onto what I had already researched and found as far as this strange thing about how we do it now, how young women and young men, how they're not getting married until much, much later. Some of them are never getting married. Some of them never having children, that type of thing. And then the effects of it. And I just thought to myself, when I was talking to Pat up there at CUA. I said, "You have the cleanest philosophy I think I've ever seen, and the most accurate that I've ever seen, and witnessed." So that would be my answer to that. And then the other thing was that here's something that'll be interesting that's related to that. When I discovered that this whole sexual integrity, sexual wellness is sexual integrity. And by the way, sexual integrity is sexual intelligence. So that's kind of the way that it links up. And we can explain that as we go. But when I discovered that, I got on the internet because I thought, okay, really the whole of humanity sits on this foundation of sexual integrity, because humans, if you look at it scientifically, humans going back a long time, like millions of years, what the science will tell us, about 2 million years ago, this whole pair bonding thing started. And the pair bonding thing is what has allowed the human brain to triple in size from that time to now. And it only happened because the male and the female worked together, pair bonded and worked together, with the male provisioning the female when a husband provisioning the wife would be the way we'd call it.
Yeah.
And during her, times that she's pregnant, again, it takes 500 extra calories for a woman to carry a pregnancy a day, and then 500 more, when she has the baby to breastfeed it extra a day. Doesn't sound like much to us because, hundreds and thousands of calories come easily to us in our society. But when they were hunting and gathering way back when, 500 was like a tremendous amount extra of calories to bring in. So this partnership that started, again, what the best science will tell you, and I think the accurate science will tell you, happened because of they can tell because of the size of the skeletons, the bones that they found as they come down in time. They would tell you that 6 to 7 million years ago is when the human line started. And it was polygynous to begin with. Polygynous meaning, the Greek term poly meaning many, and gyne meaning female. So one man with several wives. So for about 4 or 5 million years, we had a polygynous situation. And in any kind of polygynous species, you're going to have the male is going to be much larger than the female. And the bone fragments that they found, the skeleton that they found, show that males during that time period were about 50% bigger than our females today, or then. That's shrunk down to about 15 to 20% now. We're only about 15 to 20%. Monogamous species, for a lot of different reasons, the bodies and sizes of the two, male and female, are either exactly the same or very close to being the same. So what that tells us, amongst a lot of other things, is that in the time coming down to us and present, in the last particularly 2 million years, by the way, when fire was discovered and a lot of other things that humans started being able to do, run animals off cliffs and take advantage of our brains that were increasing in size, it's really made the human exceptionalism that we all know we have today, that put us on the moon, for instance, and you and I are talking here on this over who knows how many miles, comparing that to chimpanzees and where they are. So all that said, chimpanzees, fathers, once they impregnate the female, and by the way, they have a very promiscuous mating system. Once a female chimp goes into heat, and by the way, her genitals show that she has sexual swelling. It smells very provocative to the males. Most of them in the pack or pride, whatever the proper term is, mate with her, and so their mating system is one where it's a sperm competition, which has led in their bodies. And by the way, you can tell by looking at species. I hope this is more than you probably bargained for in your answer. You can look for this in a species. The males in a promiscuous species will have testicles that are much bigger than the males in another species that don't have a promiscuous mating system. And chimpanzees, even though they're smaller than we are, body-wise, they have testicles that are 3 times the size of our males. Because as far as what's been happening, as far as the genes being handed down, the ones that have had the most semen to be able to put into the female, when all of them mate with this female that's gone into heat, have been the ones on average that have had more babies born. So that hasn't been a factor for us for the last 2 million years, because we've been mostly mating monogamously. The other thing is, besides that difference and the female, the sexual swelling and that type of thing, one other thing that's a big indicator that we have we're monogamous. We're designed to be monogamous, and they're designed to be promiscuous. Is that they don't get bacterial STDs. They're immune to those because, for one thing, well, they've been promiscuous over all these generations, thousands of generations, and so the ones that would have gotten or did get STDs, bacterial ones at least, didn't make it. So they have a higher white blood cell count. The promiscuous chimpanzees do than we do, much higher. So anyway, all that said, I realized that the way. And I believe that God, had a design in all of this. That's my belief on it. It was intelligent design all the way through this. Mm-hmm. And the way he created humanity was, the key thing was this, what we call the sacrament of marriage, that allowed surplus energy to be put into the women as they were getting pregnant, and then carrying the baby, and then nursing the infant, but then pretty soon having another, having a toddler, then having another pregnancy, and on down the line. So I thought to myself, this is like profound, and I can't be the only one that has realized this. And so when I said, I'm going to search the internet, I know there'll be hundreds, maybe thousands of people that are working on sexual integrity, because it's such a key fact and part of our history.
No.
There was two two entities working on it. One was this entity trying to help teenagers stay off of porn, and the other one was Heartbeat International.
Oh yeah,
the pro-life group. And so I just I'll tell you this story, then I'll get back to your other thoughts, other questions. So I contacted them via email, and they got back to me, and they said, let's get on a phone call. And so we did. And right away they go, who told you about us? Who told you to call us? And I said, nobody. They described the circumstances, my exact what I'd done. And they said, this has got to be a God thing. They said, because we've had a sexual integrity program that we started about 20 years ago, and it's been dormant for about the last 7 years. Wow. And we're just getting ready to bring up a new version of it. And we want somebody new to lead it, and would you be interested in leading it? And would I be interested? So I've been working with them, speaking to their conferences for the last, I think, 2 or 3 years. But anyway, I say all that to say this, that sexual integrity, if I haven't defined it for you already, it's the idea of saving sex for marriage. And in a minute here, when I describe this, you'll see why it's so important. And then and marrying, one man marrying one woman, and creating a family of which the children enjoy the benefits of having one man, a father and a mother, and all the good that comes from that. So the opposite of integrity would be kind of a lot of the things we're doing, otherwise today. So
you see it everywhere.
Does that answer your question?
I think it does. Okay.
What
is the most fascinating thing that you've learned studying all this? Like, what stood out to you the most or surprised you?
There's so many things that have been fascinating. One of them is the fact that you can tell a species whether it's monogamous or polygynous or polyandrous, which would be one woman and many males, which are extremely rare. That's been one thing, but probably the most important and most I guess thing that stood out to me is what I'm about to tell you about right now, how men bond differently than women do, and how it fits in. Again, like I said, it fits in with Christianity in general, but it especially fits in with the Catholic church's approach to to
Well,
morality. And
let's
that's
just dive right into that then. How did they bond differently? Because this is, you posed this as a potential topic, and I looked at it and I was like, yes, let's do this. I'm really excited to hear about this because I think it's so interesting, the biological, physical component of falling in love. Because we're body soul composites, so it's going to be a huge part of it. And I think that it can sometimes either be put too much emphasis on it or just be neglected depending on which circles you're running in. And like recognizing that there's a very physical part of falling in love with someone. So, yeah.
yes, it's so important in these days where there's so much confusion and so much, I don't know, I think despair, in a lot of cases, especially on the side of the women that are involved, because it's women's instinct more, I think it is, than for men to bond and to fall in love. So let me just take you through it, and if you have a lot of female listeners, this is really headline news. When I've spoken on this on college campuses, the
Mhm.
women in the audiences, the young women, it was really strange at first. I thought, why are they taking their phones out and they're raising them up, and they started filming. They started filming. I think they wanted to show this to their boyfriends, and it was a strange phenomenon. So men's bonding response is more complex than women's, and what happens here with this is that males have the main bonding um, the main bonding biochemical is one called vasopressin, and different people pronounce it differently, but vasopressin, something like that. But
Mhm.
it is the important thing with vasopressin is that it has to be in the male's brain for a long period of time, and in that case, like most of these chemicals, it will start creating receptors to it, because the receptors will be formed in response to it if it's in the brain long enough. But the thing is about vasopressin is it will be washed out by the chemical explosion, the cascade of chemicals that happen at orgasm, which are serotonin, oxytocin, and especially opioids. Opioids is the big one. So the picture that arises is that the old school chaste dating, respect between the males and the females, him being around her a lot, and just loving every minute of it, going to dinner, going to movies, hugging, kissing, that type of thing, body contact, that type of thing, which again raises endorphin levels, which is another bonding chemical.
Mhm.
But avoiding sex, outright sex, and especially sex to orgasm, that is what over time binds him to her. Because again, this is a vasopressin receptor about 1 million times, enlarged. The vasopressin molecule eventually, and the question on college campuses is always, Dr. Malone, how long is it? How long does it take? And I only grudgingly tell them, but I want to tell them the truth on everything. So in order to keep that going, I do tell them. But the molecule finally docks, with it. And when it does, his testosterone starts dropping. Now, his testosterone was high because he was around this woman he's sexually attracted to all the time, and he's, not quote unquote getting anything.
Mhm.
And so again, once that docking takes place, then his testosterone comes down, and then the secondary bonding chemical for males, oxytocin, which is the primary bonding chemical for women, comes into play, and there's a double bond there, and that's when he gets, in a good way, territorial about her. He she's his woman, and that type of thing. So, and again, going back into the past, where we didn't have an expectation of sex before marriage, let's say 1960 and early and before,
Mhm.
that process played itself out over and over and over again. And it really works to the advantage of both of them, because if a woman is being promiscuous with a man, if she's easy, so to speak, that whole process, the whole vasopressin bonding process goes out the window for a couple reasons. One, I described it to you as far as just as the biochemistry doesn't mix, and the other is that men, and this is really important for women to know, men have the tendency, especially the high testosterone alpha male types, to start categorizing women right away. If she is easy, he is going to start categorizing her into the for a good time only, but not for marriage. And then If she isn't, he's going to categorize her into the other one, the marriage potential. And this is based not so much on, chauvinism and that type of thing, like a lot of women might think, but there's really an insecurity in male humans, men, in other words, because, there's a couple things at play here. There's women have what we call female choice. Female choice is based on finding somebody that has genes that really appeal to her. In other words, the good-looking guy, hunky guy, that type of thing, that will produce great children. But the other thing is the kind of guy that will have enough character to stick around and be honest and that type of thing. So she's balancing female choice, that type of thing, with his paternity certainty. With our internal gestation that we have, really only the women are the only ones that know for sure who the father is.
Yeah.
So over time, these young men from the past, it's been very important for them to be able to trust her. And so it turns out that sexual integrity and sexual loyalty are the most highly valued traits in a woman that a man is considering asking to marry him. So women need to know that. The other thing is women don't know is that a sex difference, as we're talking, after unmarried intercourse, a man's evaluation of a woman after unmarried intercourse will start dropping typically about 10 seconds after he has orgasm with her. Doesn't take
Is
very
that
long.
because you were saying the chemicals wash out the bonding chemical?
Yeah, and he's on to, if he's got a phone nearby, maybe I'm being a little facetious here, but soon he's going to be looking, in Tinder or whatever it is, for the next one and the next one and the next one. It allows a man, because this is a dopamine. It's a real, hookup sex is a real dopamine popper for men, and also, of course, testosterone. It keeps his testosterone and dopamine high all the time, and he never gets to that bonding, that vasopressin and oxytocin stage.
Mm-hmm.
So again, what the women don't realize is that, and again, I've had two young women I was working with, and they each had a mom in one case and a dad in the other case, and the mom and the dad, different marriages and such, but they both had destroyed their marriages by cheating on their spouse. And, they were single now. And they told their daughters, that their 20-something-year-old daughter, you got to have sex these days with a guy in order for him to consider marrying you, in order to, you got to let him kind of test you out. Well, again, that's the worst thing that they can do, because, here's a scenario. Because she has a more simple bonding process, all it takes is dopamine, which he's getting from being around him, and oxytocin, which is rising, by the two of them being together and, hugging, kissing, that type of thing. But especially if they have sex, her oxytocin really jumps through the roof. So
the woman will
here
then
she is,
bond a
all
lot.
bonded.
So she'll bond a lot more. She'll bond a lot more after having sex.
And it's very simple and easy for her to bond. So she's bonded to this guy, and 10 seconds afterwards, he's so much better looking than I thought he was, and he's such a great guy. He'll be such a good husband and father. Little does she know that what her giving it to him, so to speak, has kind of destroyed that, basically. So this is why the old school 1960 and back, they only had 5% of their births out of wedlock. 5%. We're at 40 now overall. And some ethnic groups have 70, up to 70, and, kind of ranges. So we're in a horrible place as far as our society goes that way. And it's because we've departed from this. Let me give you something, Colleen, here that, and your listeners, your audience, I think is really important. Along the lines of all this, kind of sum this up.
Yeah. 2
ways. One, the research is showing that the shorter the time to sex in a relationship, the shorter the relationship. I'll say it again. The shorter the time to sex in a relationship, this is on a population basis, the shorter the relationship. So first date, sex, boom. Again, what the research has shown is that, boom, that relationship lasts next to nothing. And so anyway, the longer the time that couples on average, population basis, wait to have sex. And again, I think, yours and my bias is wait until after marriage, however long that is. It turns out that the relationship lasts longer. And I was talking to a co-ed young woman on one of the campuses in Florida State, actually. And she asked the question, what's the thing that causes most marriages to break up and marriages to be unhappy?
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at her and said, I said, what the research shows is that numbers of premarital sexual partners has the biggest effect on whether a marriage will last and whether it's happy. And not meaning the higher the number, the less chance it's going to
Lower.
be happy and last. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she looked at me and boy, she did not like that answer. She kept trying to find a way, well, it can't be because of that. And I told her, and I'll tell your audience that, these are just population averages and these are on a population basis. So there's going to be exceptions to that rule. But for the most part, that's your best indicator. How a marriage is going to go is how chaste have you been in both cases up to that time. So that's one thing. The shorter the time to sex and relationship, the shorter the relationship. And the other thing that young women need to realize is that at every stage of commitment, males' testosterone drops. So what I mean by that, gets a girlfriend, his testosterone drops. They become engaged, his testosterone drops. He gets married, drops some more. They start having children, and he holds the children. They found out that they need the new dad needs to hold the child because there's a pheromonal exchange that goes on there. His testosterone drops most of all. It drops by 50%.
Does
And his
that
estrogen,
differ if she has a boy or a girl? Does that affect it? Because I've heard that it does, but I don't know. I've never seen the science on that.
I have not seen that research that
Okay.
a different sex affects it, but the research that I've seen shows that it drops by 50% at that point, and his cortisol drops by 300%. So here's his relaxed, low testosterone guy, and then his estradiol, which would be the young woman's estrogen, rises by 200%, which
Wow.
allows the oxytocin, the estrogen, which again, estradiol was one of the three types.
Hmm.
Estrogen and oxytocin are buddies. They boost each other. So that bonding process with his child really, really gets strengthened by that course of events with the biochemistry that's, again, there by nature. Again, when I look at this, I see God. I see God has instituted this pathway, this life course, this biochemical life course. So, and when we go away from it, we pay for it in certain ways. Now,
I
let me
have
just say
three
this.
questions. Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah,
So I
one
have
more
three
quick thing on
questions.
that.
Okay. Yeah, you say yours
Uh,
and then yeah.
okay. Here's the thing. The other thing that goes along with this, chronic high testosterone is bad for you. That's one reason that men generally men don't live as long as women. That's one thing.
Oh.
And it's unhealthy. While chronic high oxytocin, which is what we get from these marriage relationships, family
Mhm.
relationships, raises oxytocin. It is very healthy. It's actually cardioprotective for one thing. It also lowers cancer risk. So testosterone raises the problems with those, and
Mhm.
oxytocin lowers them. Marriage is the pathway to this, and that's what I want young people to see is that we're sacrificing a lot our well-being for that. Now, your question.
Okay, I have three, and they're kind of
Okay.
all really. They're like ones that have come up as you've been talking that I'm curious about. First of all, how long is that bonding process? Because you said women ask and you don't like to tell them, but then you tell them anyway. So I'm curious. The second is
Answer to that.
how does
Oh,
porn
oh
affect?
no, go ahead. Go ahead. Give me all three.
Yeah, how does porn affect their bonding? Does that cause chemical like disruptors that are going to keep them from men from bonding? And
Male and
third,
female or both?
how does sex or both? How does if premarital sex is going to make the man like try to start looking for another woman, what is sex after marriage? How does it affect their bonding?
Okay. So the answer to the first one, you may have to remind me your questions, but the answer to the
Okay.
first one, the dreaded answer I I have to give is 4 months. It has to be at least 4 months, okay, of dating, chastely and that type of thing before that bonding process can take place. Once again, I would advocate, you know, a yearish or so, year and a half, 2 years, whatever, of that, and then getting married, getting to know each other real well. Now, remind me of your second one.
Porn.
It
How
was
does
about
porn affect the bonding for both?
porn. Porn is the elephant in a lot of rooms
Mhm.
these days. Um, it's like an artificial sexual partner, really, and especially for men. men have males have 6 times the chance of being addicted to porn than females do. So unfortunately, I think these days it's taking the place in a lot of cases of real human relationships, and with a lot of boys and young men, because the average first age of exposure is at from 10 to 13 years
Mm-hmm.
old. They're getting addicted to it, bonded to it, at such a young age, and it puts them into depression. Is what it does, because, as I said earlier, on the hookup culture, when humans are having, especially human males, are having sex, often they're coming to orgasm. Let's just put it that way. And I hope I'm not too graphic for your audience or you, but it's hard to talk about this subject and really get the truth across without doing that. But when they're coming to orgasm often, like let's say every other day and that type of thing, and through that method, and especially having started with that, their mind basically being so plastic as it is, just going into their teenage years or preteens, that type of thing, it has a tendency to that is their sexual map, in their brain. So it kind of wipes out the typical bonding process. With rats, which happen to be very similar as far as they're obviously much smaller, but their brains are very similar to ours and work a lot of the same way. What they've done with them to the research that would impact on what you're asking, they've chemically manipulated them, because they can go into their brains and everything with chemicals, the things they wouldn't do to us, they can't do to us.
Mm-hmm.
And they've put an estrus female rat in with them and had them do the typical the young rat, just coming to maturity, sexual maturity, will find the way to mate with that female in estrus rat, in heat rat. They've done it though, where that's the same coming of maturity again. So it'd be like comparable to our young people, teenagers, and just put a hammer in the cage, and then they manipulated the rat's brain with dopamine, and testosterone, that type of thing, and he associates then the hammer or whatever it was they put in the cage with arousal. So he gets aroused at that. They put the estrus female in, and he's not aroused to her. So he's he's imprinted onto that object. So for our young, especially boys, with porn, there, my sneaking suspicion, haven't seen absolute research on it much, but because that's kind of a unique and good question that you just asked, the effect of it on bonding. My sneaking professional opinion would be that they've already bonded, with that activity that they've got going, and they're addicted to it. So it would have a negative effect on their relationships with females, real females. As a matter of fact, again, they don't have to go anywhere, and take any chances as far as like asking a girl out. They don't have to do any of that. They've got their sexuality in their bedroom or wherever it is. So it's very destructive, especially on the male side. But on the female side of it, generally females in the past have not been that very vulnerable to it.
Mm-hmm.
But here's something your female listeners should be aware of too. The research is showing and has shown that females, their age of first sexual arousal, the earlier that they have that first sexual arousal, the more open they are to these types of things, casual sex. They call it sociosexuality. Their sociosexuality index goes up. I don't like that name because it just kind of takes the place of, willingness to have casual sex, willingness to watch porn, that type of thing. So some of these girls that are maybe being exposed to porn early, they're having some of the same problems. And also girls that get abused, which is obviously not their fault. They get abused and they experience sexual arousal young, very young. They're sort of a different breed of cat, so to speak, from your typical young woman that doesn't get exposed to it, and again has a huge sex difference as far as sex drive and sociosexuality, I guess I'll just say. So the third part of your question was, remind me, third
How
question.
does, if sex before marriage makes the man start looking for another woman, what happens to the bonding with sex within marriage? Does it actually draw him closer to the woman, or is there still a change in their bonding because of that? Like a
And
negative
how
change?
So premarital sex, how does it affect him and his bonding within the marriage?
We talked about, well, no, if so, you were saying that with premarital sex, a
Mm-hmm.
man doesn't bond with a woman, he starts looking for the next woman,
Mm-hmm.
basically. How is that different within marriage? Like, if what chemically is going on with him, if he's actually married, if a man saves himself for marriage and the woman saves herself for marriage, how does sex affect his bonding with her within marriage?
Oh, it, it, it's it's perfect actually, except the one thing, with the whole purity culture of the 15 or 20 years ago, whatever it was, um, when they made sex so, like, I don't know, stigmatized it, I guess, so much that they weren't even supposed to think about, attraction, and they weren't. There's one guy that wrote the book, I've Kissed Dating Goodbye, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think, if when they went too far with that, as far as making sex bad, and you know not having any kind of physical hugging, kissing, that type of thing, um, the effect on them, uh, some of them, they got to their wedding night and were both virgins, and they were both intimidated, by, I have people that I know that shared that story with me. So I think if you handle it correctly, like again in the old days, where it was just expected that you were going to remain virgins until you got married,
Mm-hmm.
and it was normed that way, I think it works fine. Again, it's so rare these days that it's hard to do research these days on porn or that, because they don't have anybody that's not doing porn.
Yeah.
Their first research they did in 2009, they couldn't find anybody on a college campus that wasn't using porn for the control group. And there's so few that are, remaining virgins to marriage now. But that's the best case scenario, as
Mm-hmm.
long as it hasn't been stigmatized, and the bonding will take place very, very well. Uh, Both of them have worked on their muscles, so to speak, their chastity muscles,
Mm-hmm.
by resisting temptation, along the way. And so I think it's the way it was meant to be. I have a friend, a colleague, actually, a female colleague in Texas, that she was a virgin until age 32. She got married, and I met her before she got married. And so she was Miss Texas, and she was on a reality dating show. And then her husband was a Major League Baseball player. He was a virgin as well. And again, he was like around her same age, and they'd saved themselves that long. And once they got married, they've been married about maybe 2 years now, and it's been great. They're kind of an example of I think the unicorn, I guess you'd say,
So
these days. So
basically, sex within marriage is going to make the man bond better with the woman.
yeah, because he doesn't have to worry about her having had experience with somebody else and comparing him to somebody else. And
Okay.
again, the instinctively, men find women that are easy. Um, they find that suspicious as far as a long term commitment goes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like, in the wild, with an animal that finds their prey and finds them too easy. It comes across them too easy. Generally in life that doesn't happen. Generally you have to work for things that are worthwhile. So that's, yeah. Again, I would say it's the um, best case scenario, as long as it isn't stigmatized. They aren't so afraid of it that they're not able to do what comes naturally when the time comes to, after they've fully committed to each other in marriage.
I have a question too that you might know the answer to. So people talk about like the chemistry between men and women. Is that a
Mhm.
personality thing, or is that actual, like, are there people that are more like women that are more attracted to men, or men that are more attracted to women based on a chemical makeup? Like, what role do chemicals and hormones play in the chemistry between men and women?
Another excellent question. And yeah, pheromones. Have you heard of pheromones?
I mean, you mentioned them earlier with the father holding his child, but I've heard the name
Yeah.
before. I haven't heard much about them.
Well, it's real obvious and real well accepted in the quote unquote animal world. The other
Mhm.
species, and
Yeah.
all the way down to insects that's how they do their communication a lot, especially sexual communication. And more recently, humans have been shown to have pheromonal communication. And what it is it's not actually a smell necessarily, because we don't actually sense it as a smell, although the organ that actually picks up on it is up in our nasal cavity up there. And what it does is this pheromone that one sex is giving off affects the behavior of the other sex. And to your question, there are certain people that will have a tendency not to be attracted to each other on this basis. And that is, for one, that's family members. That's one reason that, a brother and a sister can be the most attractive things in the world, sexiest things around, but they're not attracted to each other because they have an extremely close, it's called major histocompatibility complex, MHC. What that is our immune system, basically. God designed us to be attractive on a pheromonal level, chemical level, the chemistry between us.
Mm-hmm.
He designed us to be attracted to people who are different from us, have a different MHC, major histocompatibility complex. And the wisdom of that, the beauty of that is that, when you get these two people that are different, have these different immune systems, they come together, they have children, those children are going to have a superior immune system to both of them. And that's just going to continue to work down the line. So that's one of the beauties of, as I mentioned earlier, the intelligent design, how God designed us. Literally on that front, women have a certain type, and this again maybe more than you're bargaining for on your answer, but they have a certain type of pheromone called a copulin, and it's named after copulate, actually. And so during a woman who's naturally cycling, and again, doesn't count for people that ones that are on hormonal birth control, which we can talk about in a minute here.
Yes.
She, every month, as she comes to her ovulatory window, we call it, which if you're counting the first day of her period, the first day is day number 1, and then 5 days in, on average, her period will stop. And, going to about 3 days after that, 3 or 4 days after that, let's say day 8, if on a 28-day cycle, 8 through about 14, so that 5 or 6 days there, that's her ovulatory window. That's when she can actually get pregnant. What's happening in her vagina is that these copulins are way up inside her, up near her uterus and cervix and that type of thing. But as she comes to this ovulatory window within the cycle, they go out to the surface. They go out near the surface of the vagina, and men that are close to them, males that are close to them, can pick that up, and it stimulates the men sexually. So, interesting research they did to find this out. They did this study in Las Vegas with lap dancers, and the lap dancers that weren't on hormonal birth control, and at the time that their ovulatory window came up, they ended up making 75% more money from the men tipping them than they did when they were not in the cycle, or if they were on hormonal birth control.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, I have another question then.
Yeah.
Based off of that.
Well,
okay. It's related to this. Are women more attracted to men when they're on that part of their cycle?
Yes. Yes. As a matter of fact, one of the other things I was going to say, and we might not get through all this today, or maybe we can come back for another session. but women, because there's so much, I think, important and interesting things to learn here. That was my experience. I really became a better self-manager once I learned all this, and that's my goal with whoever I get to share it with. Their sex drive is highest then, particularly if they combine. It doesn't have to be, but if they combine alcohol with that. Alcohol raises women's testosterone levels, and it raises men's too, a small amount of it. But then if they drink more than that, the men's testosterone levels start dropping. Okay. But women have such little testosterone normally, and compared to men have 20 times more on average. They're not used to its effect, and of course, the alcohol inhibits the frontal cortex, and inhibits their inhibitions. So if they combine alcohol with that fertile time of their period, their cycle, the ovulatory window, they're much more driven sexually and much more reckless. This is when bad stuff can happen that they kind of let happen or part of.
Yeah.
The research is interesting. Women also have a tendency to dress more provocatively, single women during that time period. If a woman that's married is going to have an affair, it's going to be during that time period. And then it's going to be with somebody that is genetically probably superior to her husband, the hotter guy, so to speak, So, yeah, it's a dangerous time as far as casual sex goes for a woman. And again, especially with alcohol involved, alcohol would be the closest thing to an aphrodisiac that I can think of, for a woman. Well, back to the pheromones. The copulins is a very interesting one, but there's this other one called androgens, and andro is the Greek word for male, so it's the pheromones that males give out, and really females. This is a bigger deal for females, and they're better at detecting them than males are. And by the way, females' sense of smell is much more acute than males is on average. So for a woman that's in a relationship, like a loving relationship, let's say a married relationship or maybe engaged, they've done research on this where they've had thousands of guys wear these T-shirts for a week with no cologne or anything and no deodorant and that type of thing, and then they've had like thousands of these shirts, and they found that these women that are bonded to these men can pick their loved one shirt out from all these shirts from the smell, and it's not even the smell. I mean, they're not really smelling it; they're just sensing it. The other thing that's amazing about women and smell and this pheromone thing is they can take a bunch of guys, and some of them are very asymmetrical. They have uneven things going on in their body, and they're what people would say are unattractive guys. And then you can have these real symmetrical guys, and then also very like masculine and muscular and that type of thing. Have them all wear shirts, the same type of thing, T-shirts, and the women can pick out the symmetrical ones from the scent, so to speak, on it. So it's much of attraction. I guess the point we're making here, much of attraction between people is chemistry, the kind of chemistry that we're talking about. And it's at an unconscious level. It's at the limbic system, which is right in the middle of the brain. So it's the emotional part of our brain. It's where, if we're going to talk about one more major sex difference between the males and the females, it's where all the sex drive of both the female and the males is located, but much more in the male side. So people are drawn to others even without the visual component, even though the visual component is important. One other thing on that, kissing is so important in this along this line as far as pheromone communication. It is especially to women. Because when you think about it, on a kiss, there's these pheromones are rife, in our saliva, in our mouths. When a woman and man kiss, they're exchanging that chemical information, and almost no males, the research has shown, will ever break up a dating situation or a chance for sex with a woman over a bad kiss. But 50% of the women will. The 50% of the women will cut off a relationship if it was a bad first kiss, because their sensitivity to the things that are in the saliva and the chemistry or not match up is really, really sensitive. And
I have another question about that then.
Women and one more quick thing. Women have much more to lose with a bad match because they're the ones that are going to end up, really their body creates the baby other than the DNA from the sperm. Go ahead.
Okay. I've read that when men and women kiss, that there's a hormone in the men's saliva that turns the woman on, and that there's a hormone in the woman's saliva that makes the man bond to them, like get more like the part that actually triggers the bonding and not just the like sexual high. Is that true? And is there any other like weird stuff going on when they kiss?
That particular piece of research I have not heard before, but it makes sense with what the rest of the story that I know about, because women have a tendency to have these reinforcers to bonding if they want to, kind of bonding encouragers.
Mhm.
that they have, in their whole makeup. So that would make sense. And on the guy side of it, not so much, but um, it's very very possible. But I can't say that I've heard that. There's the element of just sort of related to that, women that have sex with a guy that they, let's say it's non-consensual sex, and
Mhm.
or becomes non-consensual sex as it goes on. They have a ways as far as being able to kind of be inhospitable to the semen that's left there.
Mhm.
So, and not only our species, but there's some species that have real, they call it cryptic something or other, cryptic rejection, that type of thing. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, there's all these different chemical, um, in some cases, warfare going on, and then
Mhm.
other sexual conflict, they call it. And in
Mhm.
other cases, things that are promoting bonding, especially on the female side of it. Or in the male side of it, I'll just say this as far as semen goes. Um, a male that's having sex with a woman, she doesn't know it oftentimes, but his semen has things in it that makes her feel better. And the exact chemicals, let me see if I can find that. Well, just from memory, um, serotonin, um, endorphins. Again, there's one more. There's one more along that line, and then also FSH, follicle
Mhm.
stimulating hormone, which is what part of the way that our own system stimulates ovulation, and
Mhm.
LH, luteinizing hormone. It has all of that in the semen. So again, ideally, I tell this to every group that I ever speak to. All of this, that fact alone speaks volumes and screams monogamy, because within a committed relationship, the man and the woman having, as they call it, unprotected sex,
Yeah.
no condom, it's really beneficial, to both of them. They've literally found that the women in a good marriage, let's just say, and having unprotected sex have much higher scores as far as not being depressed than women who are, let's say, not married and the guy wearing a condom and they're not getting any of that semen
Okay.
into their system. It's absorbed in the vagina. So anyway,
Knitting.
there's element after element. If we're able to go through this some more, um,
Yeah, we can go through a little bit more.
okay,
Would you
okay,
be open to coming back on the podcast at some point to talk about the contraception side of it? Because I think that's too big of a topic to tackle all of that today, but I would love to do like an episode on the like biological problems of contraception.
I would love it, and I would be
Okay.
honored to do that, because that's another thing that brought me to the Catholic Church, was how accurate the Catholic Church's stand is on that, how healthy it is on that. So
Yeah.
yeah, consider it
Well, let's
done. So
okay. Well,
what was
let's
your?
go through
Did you
your
have any
points
other
now, and
questions?
then let's just you had said you had some more points, so why don't you go through those, and if I have questions, I'll ask them because most of the ones
Okay,
I had left were more related to the contraception side, so I'll save those for the next one.
okay, very important topic.
Hmm.
Um, Going on with sex differences. Okay, so
Hmm.
again, a huge one. The front page news is that men don't bond through casual sex. And by the way, casual sex is an oxymoron, because there's nothing casual about sex.
Yeah.
So women that are listening, know that you've got a superpower. The superpower is called chastity, chastity until marriage. And the guy, the bar. If the bar is low, as far as obtaining sex, the guy will slither over it. Thankfully, if it's high, he will find a way to get over it. And high is the where you want it to be, the conditions you set, which is historically what's happened. And even other species, the females in other species demand certain things, certain things happen before sex occurs. All right. Why is it so important? What drives males to go through all that to get sex? Well, men are much more easily sexually stimulated than women are. There are three areas of the male's brain that are twice as big as, and they're the sexual pursuit areas. One's called the medial preoptic area, and as it implies, it's located right behind where the optic chiasm comes into the brain, right
Okay.
there in
Yeah.
the hypothalamus. and it's, as I said, twice as big and packed with twice as many neurons. So and very sensitive to sight. That's why women may find themselves, with a guy on a date, and he's kind of scoping the room. Well, it isn't so much you lady that is the problem. He's kind of got this built-in thing going on there with that. And also, that area is very sensitive to testosterone levels, and men on average have 20 times more testosterone. Another area of the hypothalamus, which is really the seat of sexuality in the human brain, it's called the INAH3. I'm not going to take time to go into that, but it's another sexually important area, and is twice as big, in fact, with twice as many neurons, and also sensitive to testosterone stimulation. Mm-hmm. The third area that I want to mention is the amygdala, and the amygdala is also twice as big in the males and packed with twice as many neurons, and is sensitive to sexual cues in males, and testosterone. The amygdala is the brain's survival, command, and control center. And so when it makes a statement and gives a signal, it's pretty hard for the male brain in this case to ignore it. Interestingly, women's amygdalas are very sensitive to food cues, and again, that may go back to our our ancestors, the way it was for our ancestors. One other thing, it's not even so much of a huge difference in the 20 times more testosterone that men have. It's also women have 13 times more sex hormone binding globulin. So we're really getting the chemistry here. SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin, and what it does is it deactivates testosterone and estrogen. So you really have a really mismatch in the male brain versus the female brain as far as sex drive goes. In most cases, there's a few exceptions, but it's really, really massively unequal. And I think the reason for that is
how does that affect their interactions? That what? Yeah, I guess I think you're about to answer it. What is the reason for that? Because that doesn't seem like a good thing.
Well, again, in the past, and this goes back our 2 million years, men have not always, but oftentimes in the past, even up to 1960, have not had a choice on sex except for meeting what the female's demand was for it. Mm-hmm. So it's been a strong drive for them, and they've reached their highest level of testosterone at age 17. Mm-hmm. And it stays high throughout their 20s and only starts going down, like about 1% a year after age 30. Mm-hmm. To me, Colleen, again, in God's design, that is to drive young men towards being willing to commit to this young woman who's, demanding a certain romantic and chivalrous behavior in the past out of him, and he's going to commit to her, at some point. You compare that to our hookup culture, and you don't have that. You don't have the women laying down the law, which has been their, mm-hmm. historical, and I think given to them by God as a sexual nature role. And so with feminism, feminism ironically has really been destructive to women. I believe, and again, especially the last 10 to 15 years. So that would be the purpose of it, would be to drive men who wouldn't necessarily maybe want to commit, given other choices, to commit, basically, and to play by the rules in order to be around this woman, the chaste rules that we talked about, and for that vasopressin process and then oxytocin bonding process to be able to take place. So that's what I think the purpose of it is.
Okay, I have a question based off of that.
It's gone haywire though with the idea that men and women should act just the same. That women should. The phrase they use is that women should F like men, mm-hmm. and if you don't, you're being repressed, and all of that. So that's really, really been a bad, ungodly, pathway, and that's one of the main things that needs to be fixed in order to get us back to where we need to be. Do you have another question?
I do.
Okay, go for it.
So if women are supposed to set this high bar and men need to have that high bar to be able to commit to women, what does that mean for women who have a high bar in a society where other women are willing to sleep around? Like, will men actually rise to that occasion, or are those men just going to settle for the women that are easy to get? I know you were saying they don't like when it's easy, but it seems like you have an imbalance of if some women are setting the bar really high and some women are willing to sleep around and men need to have a high bar to be able to commit. What does that look like in today's modern age where you have such different situations going on?
Excellent. It's a tough situation for women, especially chaste women, really strongly believing Christian, especially
Mm-hmm.
Catholic women, traditional Catholic women. It's really tough. But what it comes down to is the men that the women that the men are sleeping around with can pretty much count on not getting somebody to commit to them
Mm-hmm.
as their life goes along. The woman that won't play the game and is doing things that I think the way God intended them to be done
Mm-hmm.
may have to wait a while because of this situation. But eventually, I think she's going to be the one. She has the scarce resources. She's the rare one that hasn't been with a bunch of other guys, and the guy doesn't have to worry about it. And she's kind of proof of concept that she can be loyal, and that her um, sexual integrity is important to her, and she's not just going to give it to any guy. So it's kind of a quality versus quantity,
Mm-hmm.
concept. The quantity the guy will take as far as every day, for a week or two or whatever, and then he's on to somebody else. The chaste woman is the one that's going to get his attention as far as a marriage partner, that type of thing. That's literally what the research has shown. Now, things like how attractive she is, enters into it. Those are the tough type of things. But um, the other thing to throw in here too, though, is that around 80% of the men will, given the chance to have easy, quote unquote, casual sex and priceless, not something they have to pay a price for, will take it.
Mm-hmm.
But the top 20%, and this is interesting, the top 20% in intelligence, just general intelligence, IQ, we would call it, general IQ of men are smart enough to want to have exclusive relationships. They don't want to have the hookup situation going on. So a woman who's saving herself in the way you're describing would be a very attractive partner for somebody, one of those males in the top 20% of IQ that's looking for somebody that has the same attitudes towards the importance of exclusivity as that he does. Um, so yeah, that would be the answer I would give. When society is as it is, it makes it really, really tough on women, particularly as this society is. That's why I say it's so ironic, the effect that feminism has had on women. But the other thing I want to say is that society, we have a tendency to think that history is linear, that just, it started out over here, being really, really pure and, back in the old days. And it just, continuously gotten worse and worse and worse and more sexual anarchy as opposed to sexual integrity.
Mm-hmm.
But actually it's been, ups and downs. It's been cyclical. So in the last 350 years, we've had really three pendulum swings between sexual anarchy, which I would call, promiscuity for another word, and sexual integrity, which is the thing my life's become all about. So so again, it's changed three times in 350 years. So about 100 plus, a little bit over 100-year cycle.
Mm-hmm.
We're, I think, at the tail end of a very bad sexual anarchy
Yeah.
phase cycle. So the heartening news is that I think we're on the backlash of this one, and I think a lot of women are kind of getting tired of it. And I think that they're realizing that if, as a union, so to speak, if
Mm-hmm.
they if more and more of them start not playing the hookup game, they're going to start raising their value up, and they're going to start getting more of what you described, earlier. You're very astute to pick up on that. One piece of evidence on that is that I don't know if you or your listeners, your watchers, have heard of the dating site OkCupid, but
No, I haven't.
they started out about 2004, 2005,
Okay.
and they were smart enough they surveyed their customers every year, as to their attitudes, towards like casual sex and all of that, hooking up, and from 2004 to 2016, it was always increasing um, the desire for casual sex and the openness to casual sex and that type of thing, hooking up.
Mm-hmm.
But starting about 2016, it started going down, the openness to casual sex and that type of thing, and especially with the females. The females have led the way, like a 10% a year, basically. So anyway, I think that, I think we have empirical proof that what we've gone through, is a terrible. It's probably the worst sexual anarchy period humans have ever been in.
Mm-hmm.
Probably next to, probably somewhere up there with Sodom and Gomorrah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we're due for, and we're seeing a swing back in the other direction. I think that what you do, what you're doing, what I'm doing, what quite a growing number of other people are doing,
Mm-hmm.
is calling attention to the situation and bringing the science to bear on it, and getting the word out there. So
Yeah.
I'll stop there.
I was going to say science and truth always complement each other. So what the church has been teaching for 2,000 years is backed up by science. And you see that in so many areas of life. So I'm so glad that you are able to bring the science to prove that point here.
Well,
So,
thank you. And I had the same reaction to it. And I think it can be so useful to 20 something, and 30 something, especially females, because as we're going to find out when we go into some more of this, the females are much more vulnerable, to the problems, to the STIs, and heartbreak right off the bat. They're set up for heartbreak, as we talked about. But in the long run, it being the system that it is, that is just a terrible heartbreaker on the women and all that.
mm-hmm.
It really is, in the long run, is really bad for the males, because they end up not having the lives that they should be, where that sexual energy is channeled into productive means, and where they become great providers, great husbands, great fathers. It's destructive to both sexes, profoundly. So the purpose of us you and I having these discussions, is hopefully the folks that are going to be listening to this
Mm-hmm.
are going to get wiser by it, by not having to experience them themselves.
Exactly.
Don't learn by experience if you can. Learn by somebody else's experience.
Yeah.
So,
well, thank you so much for joining us today. And I look forward to having you back on to talk about how contraception affects it and everything else that there is to talk about. So thank you.
well, it's an honor for me. Thank you, Colleen, and I'll look forward to the next time.
Yes. And to all of our listeners, please remember to like, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, and keep on living the culture of life. Check out the new ebooks that we have coming out. God bless.